Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Financial Advisors Want to Know. Today's episode, I have Sonja Ecklund on the show. She is a board certified health and wellness coach and a financial social work coach. And we connected because she has had really great experiences with running a curated email marketing, newsletter. And it was something that I encounter often as, questions from advisors on how to make them successful and what makes them work. So Sonja is on today to talk to us about that. In today's episode, the focus is really around how email marketing, when you have a small list and looking at your list as people that you can provide value to, even if they're not becoming a customer, it's a really great leveraged way to do that. And then engaging your list through the power of storytelling instead of a sales focus. So thanks for joining me today, Sonja.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with your list in particular, and just how you got into doing the newsletters, and what I know you've had some big takeaways on the communication part of it, but how did you get into doing this, and maybe what should advisors be thinking about when they're
Yeah,
getting ready to launch a list?
definitely. So I think email marketing is one of these things that I really procrastinated starting in my own business. I've been running a super small private practice since 2011. It's always been kind of a side hustle. And in 2024, I went off on my own full time. And I knew that email marketing was something I was going to really need to do consistently if I was going to
Mhm.
be successful in full-time private practice. And I just felt a big resistance to it, partially because my list was really small. Like I had maybe 100 people on my list from, you know, various things that I had done over the past decade, and it just didn't feel particularly cohesive. And I also just wasn't totally sure that those people wanted to hear from me. So it took a little bit of convincing myself that I had something valuable to say and that I could provide value in an email. I'm an email minimalist, and so I'm very conscious of not taking up space in people's inbox unless it's really providing value to them. And so when I decided that I ultimately really needed to start writing consistent emails, the first thing I did was I chose a cadence that was going to work well for me. I decided that once every 3 weeks was probably a good cadence, little more than little more than once a month, but not every week. Every week felt overwhelming to me, so I scaled it back a little. And then I really focused on thinking about who I was talking to. Who are these 150 people that were on my list, and what might they want to know, and what value could I be providing to them? And so that's really how I got started, and it's been pretty cool to see it succeed.
That's awesome. Yeah, because in my firm, we've had an ongoing newsletter internally, and I've had a similar approach to you where we have a bit, bigger, quite a bit bigger of a list, but that's just because I do like continuing education work for other tax professionals.
Hmm.
But I've found a similar thing to what you were saying of just, when you're focused on like, I'm really just, this is a communication that has to provide value first. And it's not just an opportunity for me to pop up, my name to pop up. It's more, I have something that I actually need to say to this individual,
Yeah.
that they need to hear, and that it's worth their 2 minutes to read or however many minutes to read. So that's great. And in terms of like the language, most of my kind of newsletters and emails have been really just a heavy education focus.
Hmm.
How have you found, you know, the challenge with it is content writing, right?
Yeah, totally.
And what have you found works for you in terms of coming up with content, or things that you found to be helpful in that respect? Because I think for a lot of advisors, and especially any kind of financial professional, that's the challenge. It's like, well, I know so many things, like like what do I actually talk about, and like how do I make this useful, and then also building the ritual of actually writing it and having the time to write it, that sort of a thing. So what are your thoughts around that?
Definitely. So I'm kind of a systems nerd. And so one thing that I do is when I decided on my cadence of every 3 weeks, I blocked off 2 hours on my schedule on the Monday, before I was going to send the email. So I send my emails on Wednesdays. So I have in my calendar every 3 weeks a recurring event that says this is the day I send my email. And then I also scheduled time in my schedule to actually write the email. I also have a list of ideas, topics, things that people might want to know about, things that I think are interesting, as well as kind of a list of prompts that I've come up with that seem to help me generate some ideas and some content. And so I just add to that list. I organize everything I do in Asana, and I have just lots of little notes to myself about things that I might want to write about. And when I was really like starting this process, I decided I needed to think about like what is my newsletter? Like, what am I doing here? I don't necessarily want to, you know, focus it on like, it's September. Here are things to focus on in September. I didn't want to do it like based on the calendar year. And I didn't
Mhm.
really want to do it based on like sales. I was not trying to focus on saying, like, here are all the ways you can work with me, sign up for my services. And what I decided that I really love to talk about are behavior change, tools that help people align their life with their values. I love to ask and pose powerful coaching questions to people. And I love to share thought provoking stories, both from my own life as well as things that I hear from my clients. And so those were kind of the four things that I decided could be the focus of my list. And that's provided me with enough like ideas to generate pretty consistent content over the past year.
That's great. And so have you found that this how have you found in terms of growing the list? Like do you find like people more you found that it's grown over time, or um how has that experience been in terms of actually getting people to like sign up for it? Like what's your
Yeah.
process around that? Hey there, Catherine here. Thanks for listening to the conversation. Just wanted to explain a little more about what we do. So, I'm a CPA here with Dominion. We're a tax firm that works specifically for financial advisors as they're growing and scaling their practices to help them avoid tax waste, make the right calls, and grow practices that they love. So, if you're interested in saving more, you can DM me on LinkedIn with the word guide, and I'll send you over our guide for financial advisors to scale tax efficiently, all my top tips to unlock six-figure savings. Thanks, and keep enjoying the show.
Absolutely. So I have, of course, just a lead capture on the footer of my website. And about once every couple weeks, I post something on LinkedIn or Instagram. I kind of rotate between the social media platforms to see if I can encourage more people to join my list. My list currently is 220 people, so it hasn't grown immensely since the beginning of the year, but it's grown. And I think the thing that's cool is it's growing with the right people. Like my unsubscribe rate is 0.9%. So I've had four or five people drop off my list in the time that I've been sending these emails. And I'm not particularly focused on that as a metric of success, but I think it's interesting. I think it provides me with a little bit of insight into the fact that the people who are getting my emails want to be getting my emails, and that's who I want on my list. I don't want 20,000 people on my list who don't actually want to be there. I want 220 people on my list who are like, huh, this is interesting. And if I can throw out a couple stats, I'm seeing my open rates stay pretty steadily between 84 and 85%.
Wow, that's
Um,
an excellent open rate.
it's high, definitely. I'm still kind
Yeah.
of surprised at how high it is. But again, that tells me that while my list is small, it's mighty. The people who are on there for a reason. They want to be there and they're reading what I have to say. I've noticed that my click rate varies between, I have emails that are one-time emails, and then I have emails that are campaigns for people who have signed up for particular products. And so, of course, my campaign click rate is a little higher at 35%, and my one-time email click rate is at 9%, which are also higher than I expected them to be, which is cool to see.
Yeah, and I think it shows that you've got, a messaging communication fit, right?
Hmm.
I think for a lot of people when they go to do these kinds of um, marketing campaigns, you're like, oh, well, 200's not a lot, but it's like if
Hmm.
it's those are real people on the other
Right.
side. And if you had a room of 200 people where they're showing up once a month to listen to you talk, like that's very meaningful. And when you have that kind of a high click through rate and you have a high, a very low unsubscribe rate, that's the effect of what you're getting. So I think it's easy for people to get discouraged because you can see some of these like big numbers that get pushed out on social media of like, oh, I post something on Twitter and it gets, 100,000 impressions, or even on LinkedIn where it's like a much smaller playing field of like getting 10,000 impressions on something is considered good. The thing with like an email newsletter, that the benefit that you get in my experience is like you're not subject to an algorithm, and then also
Hmm.
like people are actively opting in and actively taking a look at what you've got. It's not just you've been scrolled on a feed.
Totally.
So that makes a huge difference. So for advisors who are like, okay, I maybe have a list of, 150 people that I'm going to do this for, set up a cadence, I love the idea of you really just have to block it into your calendar, keep a running list of ideas, and the way that you frame that for prompts of stories, and having a focus of what your newsletter is. I imagine like a lot of what this really comes down to as well, especially for a financial advisor, would be, okay, well, you really have to be speaking to a very similar client avatar in order for this to hit well. And that if you have like a generalist approach, it's going to be kind of hard to create content that's really going to speak to an audience if that audience doesn't have kind of cohesive principle to it. So could you speak to that a little bit around, what you've done to have the audience of people have enough like cohesion or like niching or et cetera, so that when you're writing this content, like you actually are getting that kind of an impact with them?
It's a really interesting question because that's actually a problem that I face on my email list. And it's one of the reasons that I have been surprised at the statistics behind the emails I'm sending is that I have 4 different types of people who are on my list. People that are, people I do education with, people that I do coaching with, people who are my friends and family who have just subscribed to support me, and former colleagues that I used to work with. And that's kind of like this segmentation of different people that I'm talking to who all have different skill sets and know different things and are here for different reasons. And so when I sat down to address that, I really strongly considered for a while, like only talking to one specific group of those people. And then I thought, all of these people are people. All of these people are humans. And so, what issues might all of these people have in common? What challenges might all of these people be facing? And, like, what's the common denominator? And so, I'm a pretty visual person. So, I literally sat down and drew a Venn diagram of, like, what is going to speak to this group and this group and this group? And then, where's the overlap between these different groups? And the overlap between the groups is where I try to target, like, 80% of my content. And then when I have something specific to say to, the group of people who participate in my ongoing education services, I talk to them in a small section of the email. I never want somebody to open the email and think this is totally irrelevant to me. And so I try to speak to humans as, people who are going through life's challenges and maybe need a little support along the way. And then I can kind of pop in little specifically segmented pieces that might talk to someone specific.
Yeah, that's great, because I think for some advisors, like if they aren't going the niche route and it's more like a mixed composition of audience, that's a great tactic for being able to still have people feel like they're being heard and paid attention to, but not excluding the other people, especially if you have more, because I know a lot of practices run on a just very organic marketing composition where maybe 80% of their business is coming in off of referrals, and those referrals are going to be similar to the clients that you have, but at the same time, it's not the same thing as like, oh, I have a niche in optometrists or something like that. So that's a great way to do that. And I guess maybe to not dissuade people of, that this does work, even if you are dealing with people that have, you're a mixed audience composition. So that's great. What do you think has been like the biggest challenges for you with doing this, between getting started and then kind of midstream? Like, have you found the commitment to consistency to be challenging, or kind of what are things that in the process of having an active email newsletter that maybe you found challenging, or that are starting to be challenging now that you're more experienced in it?
Honestly, I think a lot of it is my own imposter syndrome, my own stories I tell myself about, like, wondering if I'm going to send an email that results in a 20% unsubscribe rate, wondering if
Yeah.
I'm going to send an email that, 5% of people open. And so there is a part of me that looks at these statistics and feels really proud of them. And there's a part of me that also needs to remain really unattached to the outcome of where my statistics stay, because over time, as my email list does grow, I imagine that people will pop in, people will pop out, and that's okay. And so I think for me, just getting over some of the stories that I tell myself, some of my own self-limiting beliefs, has been the most challenging part of it.
Mhm.
I never have a shortage of ideas. I never have a shortage of things to say or things I could talk about or things that I could share with people that could make an impact on on people's lives. But I do notice that I constantly am asking myself whether I'm adding value. I'm constantly just asking myself if I am showing up in a way that's truly serving my clients, or if there's something else that I'm doing in writing my emails. And so I think that's been the most challenging thing in this whole process, which, it's I think that's a struggle a lot of people can relate to. There are a lot
Mhm.
of coaches in the world, and there are a lot of financial advisors in the world, and people have preconceived notions of what both of those job titles are.
Mhm.
And sometimes I feel like I'm sort of compensating for some of the bad apples in the coaching world, and having to kind of make a name for what coaching can be, because people have a lot of negative assumptions about what coaching is. And I think that is a struggle that a lot of financial professionals probably face as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And so I guess as we wrap up here, we got connected through LinkedIn. So
Hmm.
wherever people are listening to this, I'll post that. But um, and then I'll also post a link to your email list. So if people want to see, samples of what you've been doing and listening to, your thoughts, there'll be the link to that as well. But for people looking to get in touch with you, or resources, are those the best places, or what works well for you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I would love to have people pop into my email list and unsubscribe if you don't want to be there anymore. And then
Freak
my
Sonia out with the statistics.
and then my website is sonjaecklund.com. So I would love to have people come visit me there and get in touch. It's always great to meet other professionals.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today, Sonia. And for those listening, you'll be able to get those links wherever you found us, if this is YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever. So thank you for joining me. And until next time, thank you everybody for listening. And this was the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast.